Hey folks, how's it going? Dr. Spin. It's pretty safe to assume that video games and video game music is a very important genre for creativity in contemporary culture. You know, I mean, you can't walk across a middle school band hall without some knucklehead kid walking up to a mallet and going. And as much as that's kind of a really recognizable tune, and it's going to set your mind off on all those times you played Mario growing up, that particular era of video game music was very limited. It was, as far as what was possible, 8-bit music has its own following. But in contemporary video games, the palette is much, much broader. And it's a whole venue that's just pregnant with possibilities for artistic expression. And this week's artist, C418, is one of the guys that's really starting to, has in the past, and is continuing to sort of exploit that venue. The album that I'm talking about by C418 this week is Excursions. Now, I discovered Excursions through a Bandcamp recommendation. I'm going to seem terribly out of step to a whole group of people that are probably going to walk into this video because C418 is best known for providing the soundtrack to Minecraft. And there's a whole generation of kids, now maybe not even growing out of being kids, who know the music that he composed for that, like we would know the Mario theme. But C418 had come from a background of just kind of being a composer on his own that was just kind of putting things out on a blog and ended up collaborating with the creators of Minecraft, and it ended up being a big hit that has actually been kind of a cultural phenomenon. Although that's his claim to fame, C418, who's also, by his actual name is Daniel Rosenfeld, but he goes by this project name C418. C418 has released many albums outside of the Minecraft project. This newest one, Excursions, is my introduction to his work. And it's a pretty compelling listen as far as electronic music goes. I think that C418 is in a pretty unique position to be very creative with a broad variety of electronic music that's not tied to any one particular function. I see C418's Excursions as sort of sitting at this nexus of a broad variety of electronic music styles and kind of navigating through these styles quite easily because of the background that C418 has as a soundtrack artist. It's got this ambient component to it. It's got kind of electronic minimalism. It's got this sort of symphonic aspect to it. And it's got these kind of EDM aspects to it. It's almost like or kind of a slowed down version of dance music, of like what Deadmau5 would do. Each of these disparate styles sort of fit into C418's identity as a whole. And the common ground that they all share is that this music is meant to be sat down and listened to. Even though it's got these dance aspect to it, it's not really meant to be dance music. It's a little too slow for that. It really can't be just an ambient album because after a while the EDM aspects sort of show up and make everything sort of loud and more kind of festive and lively. So it's not any one of these things, but each of these different parts of the album fit together into this unique puzzle and creates an album that's really meant, again, to be listened to from beginning to end. And in the days of, especially as you're talking about C418's normal artist, which is people that generally don't listen to albums straight through. They pick out favorite songs, they put it on a playlist. It's a very interesting approach for him to have taken. And in a way, it comes off as almost as an intellectual exercise, but the way that he talks about the album indicates that he's not really as interested in its superficial manifestation, but the deeper underlying ideas to the album. He has a very he talks very eloquently about the sound qualities and the kind of sounds he likes to use with his music. And he seems to look at ambience and rhythm and melody all on equal footing. Each of these elements take center stage on Excursions, setting the stage for the next style, for the next manifestation of the C418 sound. No, I think Excursions is a pretty engaging listen. It's not without, I do have some issues with it, but interestingly, if you listen to the interviews with Rosenfeld, many of the things that I thought of as criticisms of the album are actually specific obstacles that he set up for himself in the creation of the album. For example, the album is not particularly melodically driven. It has some kind of long, repetitive riffs that are melodic in their nature, and that will help you identify one song from the next. But generally speaking, there's not a whole lot of melodic material, but that was purposeful. He was trying to avoid, he wanted to see what would happen if he tried to make some music that's not bound together by obvious melody. He also had this really interesting idea that he wanted to write the same song but change the site of the writing. So for example, he would take this idea of the song and write it in Austin. And then he would go to Berlin and write the same song in Berlin. And it turned out that the manifestations of those two songs were pretty radically different from each other. But the seeds of the idea were very much the same. Now, on the one hand, and this is the idea of one of his concepts behind the album, is like he has the song and he takes this song on excursions around in various sites. And it does kind of feel like the same ideas do start to come up again and again. But if you know that what he was trying to do, you could also say that makes the album seem very cohesive. So reframing these criticisms that I had of the album whenever I first listened to it, in terms of perhaps experimental obstacles that he was attempting to overcome in the making of the album, kind of reframes the way that I listened to it. And it definitely earns C418 as a project. It earns a little bit of respect for trying to not just do something because it takes the easy way out, but to try to push boundaries, to try to work within limitations, to see what could be done given those limitations. And that's a mark of a lot of really great experimental music. So it's to his credit that he's taking that step to try something different within limitations that he's putting on himself. And because of their minimalist structure, and because they do have a lot of material that does feel a little connective and maybe redundant from time to time, some of the tracks come off as a little bit overlong. Overall, it's a very impressive piece of work and a very interesting, again, more that you find out about it, very interesting intellectual exercise that he engaged in the making of this album, and a very interesting endpoint for a person whose career kind of started with making video games and making video game soundtracks. This definitely has a soundtracky quality to it. his background there shines on this recording pretty prominently if you know that about the artist. So I would suggest the C418 album, especially if you're a fan of electronic music. But I want you to keep your mind open. There are some parts where you have to be prepared to have some patience with parts of the album, and there's nothing wrong with that if you're okay with that sort of listening. So if you like the post, or if you like the previous post, please like and subscribe and get the little bell. We'll let you know that things are coming out. And when those things come out, that's when I'll see you, and I'll catch you then on the flip side.